November 4th, 2025, Louisville, Kentucky. The sun is bleeding into the horizon, casting a bruised purple light over the concrete ocean of Muhammad Ali International Airport. This is the Worldport, the beating heart of global commerce. A sprawling mechanical nervous system where 300 flights arrive and depart every single night. At 5:14 p.m., the air is thick with the smell of Jet A-1 fuel and the deafening symphony of turbofans. Lining up on runway 17 right is a giant of the skies, an MD-11 freighter. Tail number November 259 uniform Papa. Inside the cockpit, everything feels routine. The throttles slide forward. The engines roar to life, consuming air and fuel with a violence that shakes the tarmac. The captain calls out speeds. 80 knots, V1, rotate. But the moment the nose wheel leaves the ground, physics betrays them. There is no warning, no master caution light, just a catastrophic metallic scream that tears through the fuselage. On the left wing, the number one engine of 4-ton beast producing 60,000 pounds of thrust does something impossible. It snaps off. But it doesn't fall away. It flies up. Like a missile, the engine arcs over the wing, tumbling through the air, and slams directly into the tail, shattering the number 2 engine and decapitating the aircraft's hydraulic nervous system. In less than 3 seconds, a routine flight to Honolulu transforms into a flaming sledgehammer, hanging just 25 feet above the ground. The pilots fight with everything they have, but the machine is already dead. When the smoke cleared in Louisville, 11 people on the ground were dead, 3 crew members were gone, and the aviation world was left staring at a crater that burned for days. For weeks, the media speculated, was it a bomb? Was it a lithium battery fire? Was it pilot error? But the National Transportation Safety Board found something else. Something far more disturbing than a terrorist plot or a rogue battery. They found a single, fractured bolt assembly. And they found a paper trail. A trail that leads all the way back to a secret warning issued by Boeing 14 years ago. A warning that said, "We know this part fails." A warning that was read, filed away, and legally ignored. This is not just the story of a crash. This is the story of a gamble. A calculated risk taken by one of the world's biggest manufacturers, paid for with the lives of 14 people. Welcome to the investigation of UPS Flight 2976. To understand why this happened, we have to look at the machine itself, the McDonnell Douglas MD-11. Pilots call it the Diva. Others, less affectionately, call it the Scud. It is a beautiful, powerful, and notoriously unforgiving aircraft. Designed in the late 80s, it was the last breath of the McDonnell Douglas Corporation before it was swallowed whole by Boeing. It features a distinct tri-jet configuration, 1 engine under each wing, and a 3rd engine mounted high on the tail, piercing the vertical stabilizer. The aircraft sitting on the tarmac that day, November 259 uniform Papa, was a veteran. It had flown millions of miles, carrying everything from holiday gifts to heavy machinery across oceans. It was a workhorse. And like any aging workhorse, it had its scars. But the scar that mattered wasn't visible. It wasn't on the skin, and it wasn't on the radar. It was buried deep inside the pylon, the massive metal arm that holds the engine to the wing. Inside that pylon is a critical assembly, a ball and socket joint designed to let the engine wiggle slightly during turbulence. If the connection was rigid, the wing would snap. So, it needs to move. It needs to breathe. But inside that joint, there is a tiny design feature known as the tongue and groove, a small metal lip designed to keep the bearing race in place. It seems insignificant, a minor detail in a blueprint of millions of parts. But for 14 years, engineers knew that this specific tongue and groove design had a fatal flaw. Under stress, it didn't just hold the bearing, it ground against it, creating friction, creating cracks, creating a time bomb. The crew of Flight 2976 knew none of this. In the left seat was Captain Richard Wartenberg, 57 years old, a silver-haired veteran who knew the MD-11 better than he knew his own driveway. He was the pilot monitoring for this leg. Next to him, flying the plane, was First Officer Lee Truitt, 45. Sharp, focused, and ready for the long haul to Honolulu. And in the jump seat, Second Officer Dana Diamond, By all accounts, the mood in the cockpit was professional and relaxed. The cockpit voice recorder picked up the standard banter of a crew comfortable with each other and comfortable with their machine. They ran the before start checklist. Hydraulics, checked. Electrics, checked. Trim, set. They trusted the maintenance logs. They trusted the airworthiness certificate stamped by the FAA. And crucially, they trusted that if there was a known defect in the very bolts holding their engines on, someone would have told them to fix it. But the system had failed them long before they even stepped onto the shuttle bus. The MD-11 has a maintenance cycle for these pylon attachments. Every 60 months, 5 years. That means a mechanic opens the panel, looks inside with a flashlight and a mirror, and checks for damage. 5 years is a long time in aviation. A lot of turbulence, a lot of landings, a lot of stress cycles. And unbeknownst to the crew, the bearing in the number 1 engine pylon wasn't just cracked. It was shattered, held together only by the compression of the bolt and sheer luck. As Flight 2976 taxied to runway 17, that luck was about to run out. The sun dipped lower, the runway lights flickered on, the tower controller's voice crackled over the radio. UPS 2976, runway 17 right, cleared for takeoff. Captain Wartenberg replied, "Cleared for takeoff, 2976. Those would be some of the last calm words recorded on the tape, because as the engines spooled up to take off power, the vibration began to work on that fractured bearing. The cracks widened, the metal groaned, and as the aircraft accelerated past 100 knots, the aerodynamic forces began to lift the wing, pulling up against the heavy engine, pulling down. The battle between the metal and the forces of flight was about to end, and the metal was going to lose. 150 knots, the point of no return. As the first officer pulls back on the yoke, the nose of the massive freighter begins to rise. This is the moment of maximum stress. The entire weight of the aircraft shifts from the wheels to the wings, and specifically, onto the pylons holding the engines. Inside the number 1 pylon, on the left wing, the fractured bearing race finally gives up. It happens in milliseconds. The cracked metal tongue shears off. The ball element, no longer contained, slips out of its socket. The main bolt, the single spine holding the engine's aft attachment, loses its grip. Suddenly, the engine is no longer a part of the wing. It is a 6-ton projectile producing full takeoff thrust. Physics takes over. With the rear attachment gone, the engine is still pushing forward, but it's no longer held down at the back. It pivots upward, violently. The force snaps the forward attachment point like a twig. And then, the nightmare scenario begins. Usually, when an engine separates, gravity pulls it down. It falls harmlessly to the runway. But not this time. Because the engine is at full power, and because of the angle of attack, it generates its own lift. It flies. The number 1 engine vaults over the leading edge of the left wing. It somersaults through the air, tumbling over the fuselage, directly into the path of the tail-mounted number 2 engine. The collision is catastrophic. The loose engine acts like a giant shotgun slug. It smashes into the intake of the tail engine, shredding the fan blades instantly. Thousands of jagged metal shards are sucked into the core of engine number 2. It compresses. It stalls. It explodes. In the cockpit, the world dissolves into chaos. The aircraft yaws violently to the left. The stick shaker activates the sound of mechanical panic rattling the pilot's hands. Master caution alarms scream. Fire bells ring. Captain Wartenberg shouts, "What the hell was that? First Officer Truitt is fighting a losing battle. We're losing pitch. I have no control." They are 25 feet off the ground. They have lost 66% of their thrust. The center of gravity has shifted radically because they just lost 6 tons of weight from the left side. The MD-11 is heavy. It is full of fuel. It is full of cargo. And without 2 of its 3 engines, it is no longer an airplane. It is a brick. The airspeed bleeds away. 184 knots. 170. The wings begin to wobble, struggling to grip the air. The pilots do everything right. They apply full right rudder. They push the nose down to regain speed, but the ground is right there, rising up to meet them. Ahead of them is not empty runway. It is the industrial complex at the end of the airfield. Warehouses, parking lots, people. The left wing dips, stalling completely. The aircraft rolls. and at 5:14 and 30 seconds p.m., UPS Flight 2976 returns to the Earth. The impact registers on seismographs 2 miles away. The fuselage slams into a logistics warehouse, disintegrating on contact. The fuel tanks, laden with enough Jet A for a flight to Hawaii, rupture instantly. A fireball erupts, rolling hundreds of feet into the twilight sky. It engulfs the building. It engulfs the parking lot. Inside the warehouse, workers never hear the plane coming. The sound of the explosion arrives at the same moment as the shockwave. Walls collapse. Roofs cave in. Back on the runway, the tower controllers watch in frozen horror. The radio is silent. There is no mayday, just the static hiss of a frequency that no longer has anyone on the other end. Sirens begin to wail across Louisville. Fire trucks race down the tarmac, their lights flashing against the orange glow of the inferno. But as the first responders approach the crash site, the heat is so intense they can't get within 300 feet. They know, instantly, this is not a rescue mission. This is a recovery. The devastation is total. The tail section is the only recognizable piece of the aircraft left, standing like a tombstone in a sea of fire. In the days that followed, the NTSB GO team would arrive. They would walk through the ashes, stepping over twisted metal and shattered concrete. They would find the flight data recorder. They would find the cockpit voice recorder. But the most important piece of evidence wasn't in the wreckage of the main fuselage. It was lying back on the runway, alone, intact. A small metallic ring, split in two. It looked like a piece of junk, but that piece of junk was about to tell a story that Boeing didn't want anyone to hear. The fire in Louisville burned for 12 hours. But the investigation would burn for months. When the National Transportation Safety Board arrived, they were walking into a crime scene littered with red herrings. In the world of cargo aviation, when a plane falls out of the sky shortly after takeoff, there is one suspect that stands above all others: lithium batteries. Investigators immediately pulled the cargo manifest. Was there a pallet of undeclared electronics? A rogue shipment of batteries that ignited in the hold? UPS had lost a 747 inches Dubai years earlier to exactly that scenario. The theory was plausible. If a fire started during the takeoff roll, it could have severed control cables, leading to the crash. But the autopsy of the victims told a different story. Pathologists looked for soot in the airways of the crew. If there had been a fire in the air, they would have breathed in smoke. There was none. The fire that consumed Flight 2976 happened after impact, not before. So, was it the pilots? Pilot error is the convenient verdict. Did First Officer Truitt rotate too aggressively? Did he strike the tail on the runway, causing a structural failure? The flight data recorder cleared their names instantly. The rotation was textbook. The speeds were perfect. Wartenberg and Truitt were not the architects of this disaster. They were its first victims. The truth lay in a pile of cold, twisted metal recovered from the runway. Investigators brought the wreckage of the number 1 engine pylon to the lab. Under the microscope, they focused on the spherical bearing, that critical ball and socket joint we mentioned earlier. They found the bearing race, the outer ring that holds the ball in place. It was split clean in two, but it wasn't a fresh break. The edges of the crack were smooth, polished by time and friction. This metal hadn't just failed on November 4th, it had been dying for years. And then, the investigators found the smoking gun. Not on the runway, but in a filing cabinet. It was a document dated February 7th, 2011, a service letter issued by Boeing. In this letter, Boeing admitted a terrifying truth. They informed operators that they had found 4 previously reported bearing race failures on 3 different airplanes. Let that sink in. 14 years before the Louisville crash, Boeing knew that the tongue and groove design was flawed. They knew that the tongue, that tiny metal lip, was creating stress risers. They knew it was cracking. And they knew it could cause the engine to separate. So, what did they do? Did they issue a mandatory recall? Did they ground the fleet until every bearing was replaced with the new, safer design they had already developed? No. They issued a service letter. In the language of aviation, this is a suggestion, not a command. Boeing told operators to inspect the bearings every 60 months, every 5 years. They said to look for migration. Basically, take a flashlight, look into the dark gap of the pylon, and see if the bearing is sticking out. If it is, replace it. If you can't see it, you're good to go. It was a policy of, if it isn't broke, don't fix it. But the problem was, it was broke. It was just broke on the inside, where the flashlight couldn't reach. The bearing on November 259 Uniform Papa didn't migrate. It didn't stick out. It just waited. It waited through inspections. It waited through thousands of flight hours, until that final rotation out of Louisville. The tragedy of UPS Flight 2976 is not just a mechanical failure. It is a failure of philosophy. It reveals the delicate, dangerous ballet between aircraft manufacturers and airlines. Boeing inherited the MD-11 from McDonnell Douglas. They inherited its flaws. But once they bought the company, they bought the responsibility. By leaving the replacement of these bearings as optional, by setting the inspection interval at a staggering 5 years, the industry rolled the dice. They bet that the redundancy of the aircraft would save the day. They bet that a crack wouldn't turn into a catastrophe. On November 4th, 2025, they lost that bet. The crash of Flight 2976 likely marks the end of the MD-11 era. It is a sad finish for an iconic aircraft. But metal can be scrapped. Airplanes can be replaced. What cannot be replaced are the lives of Captain Richard Wartenberg, First Officer Lee Truitt, and Second Officer Dana Diamond. Cannot be replaced are the 11 souls working the night shift on the ground, who never came home to their families. Aviation regulations are written in blood. And, once again, the ink is fresh. This report serves as a final warning. In aviation, there is no such thing as a minor design flaw, and there is no price tag you can put on a human life. I'm Kevin, and this was the debrief of UPS Flight 2976. Fly safe.